My aunt didn't wait for me to take off my coat. The moment I stepped through the front door, she pressed a manila folder against my chest with both hands, the way you'd stop someone from walking into traffic. Her smile was tight, rehearsed, the kind she saves for church and custody hearings. "We need to talk about Grandma Helen's estate," she said, before dinner. I looked down at the folder. I looked at her face. I looked at the dining room behind her where my uncle was already seated at the head of the table, jacket on, posture rigid, like a man waiting for a business meeting he'd already decided the outcome of. My cousin Derek was leaning against the wall by the window, scrolling his phone, pretending not to be listening with every cell in his body. I took the folder. "Of course," I said. "Let me hang up my coat first." She blinked. That wasn't the reaction she'd rehearsed for. "Before I tell you what was in that folder, drop a comment and tell me. Have you ever had a family member treat an inheritance like it was already theirs? I want to know I'm not alone in this. I'm not someone who grew up expecting anything. My parents died when I was 9, a car accident on I-70 in January. Black ice, no survivors. My grandmother, Helen Parrish, took me in without hesitation. She was 71 years old, and she rearranged her entire life around a grieving 4th grader. She taught me to make biscuits from scratch. She drove me to every school play, every soccer game, every college tour. She was not a wealthy woman, but she was a careful one. She worked 30 years as a bookkeeper for a manufacturing company in Cincinnati, saved methodically, never touched the principal. And when she passed last spring at 86, she left behind a modest estate, a paid-off house, a brokerage account worth roughly $340,000, and a savings account she called her just-in-case fund. She left all of it to me. My Aunt Patricia was her daughter, her only biological child, and she had been furious about that will since the day it was read. What I do for a living matters here, so I'll tell you now. I'm a licensed forensic document examiner. I work for a private firm that gets retained by law firms, insurance companies, and occasionally federal agencies when someone needs to know whether a signature is real, whether a contract was backdated, whether a date was altered, whether the ink on a document was applied at the same time as the paper it's sitting on. I have testified as an expert witness in 47 cases. I have never been wrong about a document. My aunt did not know this when she decided to forge one. I came to Thanksgiving because my therapist told me that maintaining the relationship was worth one dinner per year, and because Grandma Helen had loved Patricia despite everything, and I thought honoring that love meant showing up with a sweet potato casserole and keeping my mouth shut for 4 hours. I did not expect them to have paperwork. I set my coat on the hook by the door, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked into the dining room. My Uncle Richard stood as I entered, the way men do when they want you to feel like you're in a formal meeting rather than your grandmother's house, which Patricia had inherited the use of for 10 years under the terms of the estate, before it would be sold and the proceeds distributed to me. "Sit down, sweetheart," Richard said. I sat. "We've been patient," Patricia began, settling into the chair across from me. She folded her hands on the table. "We've given you time to grieve. We understand this has been emotional, but the reality of the situation is that the estate is creating some serious complications for our family." She nodded at the folder. I opened it. Inside was a document. 4 pages, legal formatting, notary stamp at the bottom of the last page. It was a deed of assignment, a transfer of the brokerage account and the savings fund from my name into a joint trust with Patricia and Richard as co-trustees. The language at the top read, "Voluntary assignment of inherited assets in settlement of inherited assets in settlement of outstanding family obligation." I read the signature line. There was already a signature on it. It was not mine. I looked up slowly. "What is the outstanding family obligation?" I asked. My voice was level. "This is something my job teaches you. When you are looking at evidence of a crime, you do not announce it. You ask questions. You let the other person build the structure. You let them believe they're winning until the moment you need them to stop." Patricia unfolded a second document, a handwritten ledger, 2 pages, itemized, my name at the top, a list of expenses going back to 1997, my school clothes, my lunch money, my field trip fees, my prom dress, my first car insurance payment. Even, I noted with a specific chill, the cost of the casserole dish my grandmother gave me for my apartment when I was 22. Total at the bottom, $312,380. "That," Patricia said, "is what it cost to raise you." Richard and I supported your grandmother through every one of those years. We helped with the grocery bills. We took you to the doctor when Helen couldn't drive. We were present. And now you're going to walk away with everything? And leave us with nothing?" Derek looked up from his phone. "It's just fair, cuz," he said. "That's all this is." I looked at Derek, who I knew, because I had been quietly paying attention for 6 months, had run a landscaping company into the ground with a combination of payroll theft and a sports betting habit, had borrowed $90,000 from his parents to cover the business debts, had failed to pay back a single dollar, and had recently been dropped from Patricia's car insurance after his third at-fault accident. I looked at Patricia, at the document with my forged signature. "You're right," I said. "Family should take care of family." Patricia's shoulders dropped 2 inches with relief. Richard reached for the pen on the table. "I just need to understand the numbers," I said pleasantly. "Walk me through the math." What I did not tell them was that I had known about this meeting for 11 weeks. It started with a phone call from my grandmother's estate attorney, a woman named Margaret who had known Helen for 30 years and who had called me in August to tell me that Patricia had come to her office requesting a copy of the original will and asking whether there were any mechanisms by which the estate distribution could be contested on grounds of undue influence. Margaret had declined to help her and then called me immediately because Margaret understood exactly what that question meant. I thanked Margaret. I hung up the phone. And then I did what I do. I started building the file. I am not a private investigator. I don't surveil people or hack accounts or do anything that would make what I found invisible. What I am is exceptionally good at reading documents. Public documents, filed documents, the kind anyone can access if they know where to look and what they're looking at. Court filings, property records, Secretary of State business registrations. I pulled Derek's LLC dissolution paperwork, which showed the business had been dissolved for non-payment of state taxes after accumulating $34,000 in vendor debt. I pulled the small claims judgments against him, 3 of them in 18 months. I pulled the foreclosure notice on the second property Patricia and Richard owned, a rental duplex they'd over-leveraged in 2019 and hadn't been able to keep current since. I found the personal loan they'd taken from a credit union in September, $75,000, high interest, secured by their primary residence. They were underwater, completely, and my grandmother's estate was the only life raft in their range. What I was not prepared for, what genuinely surprised me, even in my industry, was the signature on that deed of assignment. I had seen my own signature enough times to know it wasn't mine. But it was close. Closer than most forgeries. Someone had practiced. The baseline was right, the letter spacing was almost correct, the loop on the Y in my last name hit the right angle. If I had been anyone else at that table, I might have looked at it and thought, did I sign this? Did I forget? I did not forget. I did not forget. I had never touched that document. But I didn't say that, not yet. Walk me through the accounting, I said again, pulling the itemized ledger toward me. Some of these entries don't have receipts attached. Patricia blinked. It's an estimate. Based on federal guidelines, I asked helpfully. Based on what we remember spending, Richard said. His jaw was tight. Of course. I nodded. I took out my phone and opened the Notes app, very visibly, the way I do in depositions when I want witnesses to understand that what they say next is being written down. And just to confirm, the total you've calculated is $312,488, representing the cost of raising me from age 9 to 18? That's right, Patricia said, across 9 years. Yes. So approximately $34,700 per year. Patricia nodded. That's interesting, I said, because the federal foster care reimbursement rate for Ohio in those years averaged between $18,000 and $22,000 annually per child. You're claiming you spent nearly double the documented cost of child rearing in this state? Richard cleared his throat. We went above and beyond. You didn't raise me, I said, and my voice was still pleasant, still even, the way water is even right before it goes over falls. My grandmother raised me. You came to dinner twice a year and sent a birthday card. I have the cards. I kept them. Silence. But that's not the part I want to talk about, I continued. I want to talk about this. I held up the deed of assignment, specifically the signature on page 4. Patricia straightened. You signed that in August, at the house before the estate walkthrough. I didn't. You did. Margaret was present. Margaret was not present, I said carefully. I spoke to Margaret yesterday. She has no record of witnessing my signature on this document. And she told me that if she had, she would have a copy in the estate file. There is no copy in the estate file. Derek stood up from the wall. This is getting ridiculous. Just sign the updated one and… I'm not signing anything, I said. I set the document down flat on the table, smoothed it with my palm, and turned it to face them. Because that is not my signature. And I know that with the same certainty that I testify to in federal court, because knowing whether a signature is authentic is my profession. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Patricia's face went through several colors in the span of 3 seconds. You're saying I forged your signature, she said, and the way she said it, already framing the denial, already pivoting to outrage, told me everything I needed to know about whether she thought she was going to get away with this. I'm not saying anything to you, I said. I'm saying it to this. I held up my phone. The voice memo had been running since I stepped through the front door. I record all professional consultations, and this has been a professional consultation because you've asked me to evaluate and execute a legal document. I record those. It's in my standard practice disclosure, which I emailed to you in October when you asked me to come today. The email, in which I had outlined my professional recording practices in 3 sentences, had been sent to Patricia's Gmail at 10:14 a.m. on October 9th. She had read it. The read receipt was in my sent folder. Richard stood up so fast his chair shrieked against the hardwood. You can't record in a private residence without consent. Ohio is a one-party consent state, I said. I am the one party, and we're discussing a document that carries my forged signature, so I think you'll agree that my interests in maintaining an accurate record are reasonable. This is insane, Derek said. You're acting insane right now. I turned to look at him fully for the first time. He was in his late 20s, broad-shouldered, with the particular exhausted tension of someone who has been in low-grade financial panic for years. I felt something for him. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. He hadn't always been like this. I remembered him at 12, showing me how to catch fireflies in a mason jar in this exact backyard. People don't usually start as predators. Derek, I said, I know about the $90,000. I know your parents took out a second mortgage on the rental property to cover your business debts, and I know the rental property is in foreclosure proceedings as of this September. I also know that this, I gestured at the deed of assignment, was their plan to solve that, to use my grandmother's bequest to save a financial situation that started unraveling 3 years ago. Derek sat down. I don't have a problem with any of you being in financial difficulty, I said. That happens. Life is hard. But I have a serious problem with a forged document bearing my name being used to transfer $340,000 out of an estate my grandmother intended for me. So here's where we are. I pulled out the folder I had brought with me, the one I had carried under my coat on my way in. Inside was a single document, a letter from my attorney, dated yesterday, addressed to Patricia Hargrove and Richard Hargrove, informing them that as of November 14th, the brokerage account and savings fund from the estate of Helen Parrish had been transferred into an irrevocable asset protection trust, managed by a fiduciary firm in Columbus, pending the resolution of the estate. Pending the resolution because I had filed a complaint with the Ohio State Bar regarding the attempted interference with estate proceedings, and because I had filed a second complaint with the Ohio Secretary of State's office regarding the fraudulent document. Patricia's eyes moved across the letter once, twice. Her lips went thin. You can't do this, she whispered. It's already done. That money is what we need. Her voice broke in a way that I recognized as genuine. Whatever else was happening, the fear underneath it was real. I felt the familiar pull of guilt that I'd been feeling since childhood. Whenever Patricia cried, the learned reflex that said, fix it, smooth it, make her feel better, be smaller. I breathed through it. I know you need money, I said. I understand that. But the solution is not to forge my signature on a deed of assignment. The solution is not to fabricate a $312,000 debt for raising a child you didn't raise. The solution is not to walk into Thanksgiving dinner with a folder and a rehearsed speech and expect me to hand over my grandmother's legacy because I was trained my entire childhood to believe my own needs were an imposition. The room was very quiet. Your mother left her estate to me, I said, looking at Patricia directly. Not because she didn't love you. She loved you. But she knew, and you know she knew, that if she left it to you, it wouldn't be there in 10 years. It would go to cover Derek's debts and Richard's investment losses and every other emergency that has consumed every spare dollar in this family for the last decade. She left it to me because she trusted me to keep it safe. And I am going to do that. Patricia made a sound that wasn't quite words. The document goes to my attorney tonight, I said. I've already sent him photographs of both sides. The ink analysis will be part of the file. If the estate challenge proceeds to probate court, this document will be entered as Exhibit A in a fraud filing. If it doesn't proceed, if we all step back from this table tonight and agree that this is finished, then I don't file anything beyond what's already been submitted. That's the choice in front of you right now. Richard looked at the letter from my attorney. He looked at Patricia. He looked at Derek. We should call our lawyer, Richard said finally. That's a very good idea, I said. Please do. I stood up. I picked up my coat from the hook by the door, the casserole dish from the kitchen counter, and my keys from my purse. I walked to the front door. The November air came in cold and clean when I opened it. Behind me, I heard Patricia say something to Richard in a low voice. Something urgent and collapsing. The sound of a plan coming apart at the seams. I didn't turn around. I had one more thing to do before I left. I walked back to the dining room doorway. All three of them looked at me. Patricia with red eyes, Richard with his jaw set, Derek with his hands in his pockets and his gaze on the floor. Grandma Helen left you the use of this house for 10 years, I said to Patricia. That doesn't change. That's in the will and it stands. You have 8 years left. I'm not taking that from you. Patricia blinked. But the account and the savings are mine, I said, and I am done apologizing for that. I drove home in the dark, east on Route 40, the same route my grandmother used to take me when we drove back from Columbus after my college orientation. The August I turned 17. She had held my hand across the center console of her old Buick and told me that I was going to be wonderful, and I had believed her because I had no good reason not to. I believed her still. 3 weeks later, my attorney called to tell me that Patricia and Richard had withdrawn the estate challenge. The forged document had been submitted to the court as part of the preliminary fraud record. Once their attorney saw the ink analysis and the notation from Margaret's office confirming she had never witnessed my signature, they understood what they were looking at. There would be no trial. There would be a formal letter of retraction. Derek had enrolled in a debt management program. I don't know if it will stick. I hope it does. The brokerage account transferred out of the irrevocable trust and back into my name in January, all $340,000 of it sitting in an index fund that my grandmother would have approved of, growing slowly and without drama, the way she did everything. I bought a new couch. I maxed my IRA. I put a portion aside for a down payment on a house that will have my name, only my name, on the deed. I also started seeing a therapist who specializes in inherited family roles. The kind where one person is designated the caretaker, the peacemaker, the child who is somehow responsible for the emotional weather of every room she enters. We talk about Grandma Helen a lot. We talk about what it means to receive something without immediately looking for a way to give it back. It's harder than you'd think. But I'm getting better at it. I opened my laptop last week to check the account balance, the way I do every first of the month. The number on the screen was positive. It was entirely mine. It had been earned by a woman who made biscuits from scratch and kept a ledger for 30 years and knew, somehow, that the way to protect the child she loved was to put her name on a piece of paper and trust the law to do the rest. I closed the laptop. I sat for a moment in the quiet of my apartment. Then I opened it again and transferred $500 to the local foster care fund in Helen Parrish's name. She would have done the same thing. If this story touched something in you, please like and subscribe. We tell stories here about the quiet kind of strength, the kind that doesn't yell, doesn't beg, just builds the case and waits. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to protect something that was rightfully yours from the people who were supposed to protect you? I read every single one.